Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. Today is day 11, and our main topic today is the genitive case. So we'll finally be adding a second case today. In this chapter, chapter 2, we'll be adding yet a third case, the accusative, and we'll also be learning a lot about Russian verbs. So if you were at all bored during chapter 1, I think you'll find chapter 2 has more than enough to keep you busy. Maybe too much, but again, we have to get through this somehow. Okay, so today we're adding the genitive case. Now keep in mind quickly that all of the nouns and adjectives we've seen up to this point have been in the nominative, right? The nominative is the case you use in Russian for subjects or just sort of pointing at things and calling them by name, right? So now we're finally going to add a second case, the genitive, and see what it expresses. We can have a quick preview of that if we look at this very famous Soviet era painting from 1942 called Obrona Sevastopolya, The Defense of Sevastopol. Okay, now look at the English version of that title, The Defense of Sevastopol. We see what happens quite often where in English we have a prepositional phrase of Sevastopol, right? That is, we rely on a preposition to express the relationship between two nouns. In Russian, we simply have a case ending. So to express that idea of in the English, right, basically possession or some other kind of close relationship between two nouns, we add a genitive ending. We go from Sevastopol, right, that's the nominative, to Sevastopolya. We've effectively added an a vowel to that soft noun ending, and that gives us Obrona Sevastopolya, the defense of Sevastopol. Okay, so there's a quick preview of how the genitive works, and a lot more on that later. First, I'd like to just introduce some new vocabulary and also the concept of an animate noun. Okay, so when we say that a noun is animate in Russian, it simply means that the noun refers to basically something that moves around, right? So that can be a human being, of course, and also an animal. Pretty much any kind of animal. It could be a furry, a kitten or a puppy or whatever. It could be a spider or some other creepy crawly thing. Basically anything that moves, right? Think about animation, animate, right? That's what we mean by this grammatical category, animate. So animate nouns could be an answer to the question kto, meaning who, right? So normally we would answer the question kto with a person, although it's kind of funny in children's books. If we're looking at like, oh, this is a tiger, you'll get questions like kto это tiger, right? So it's kind of a peculiar use of who that you sometimes see in Russian, especially in kind of children's uh, books and things like that. Okay, so anyway, more about that later. For now, let's just read through the new vocabulary, talk about how we're grouping it, and just practice pronunciation. Okay, so again, we are grouping our nouns by hard versus soft endings, and also by gender, right? So today, because we're talking about animate nouns, we're not going to be seeing any new neuter forms, right? They're all going to be either masculine or feminine. So let's start out with the hard nouns, hard masculines, and let's just read through the list here. Vrag, автор, поэт, сосед, мальчик, сын, кот, котенок, щенок, президент, знакомый, which is actually an adjective, right? Some adjectives can stand alone as nouns. Внук, муж, жених, ребенок, игрок, солдат, студент, аспирант, друг, профессор, отец, человек. Now, note carefully that although that is masculine grammatically, that refers to a human being, right? So it by no means implies that we are talking about a male person. Человек can mean a man or a woman or any human being whatsoever. Брат, родственник, товарищ, начальник. Okay, next we have a few more hard masculine nouns, but perhaps somewhat surprisingly, they have feminine endings, right? So these all look like hard feminine nouns, meaning they end in an ah, but these are all going to be masculine for purposes of agreement, and we see that they all refer to a male person. Well, for the most part, more on that later. Okay, so these are all masculine nouns. Papa, дедушка, коллега, зануда, мужчина, пьяница. That brings us to a really important principle. So when we say that these masculine nouns they have feminine endings, they're masculine nouns, but they take feminine endings. You should think of Russian nouns and adjectives and so forth as having only they have a certain set of endings by definition, right? So if we have a feminine noun, or in this case, a masculine noun that shows feminine endings, those are the only type of endings that this noun can take. It's not going to suddenly switch over to taking masculine endings. It's going to follow the feminine paradigm throughout all of its case endings. Another example of that we just saw with the words nakomi, right, which is an adjective. So we've listed it here as a noun because it can stand alone, uh, almost like a noun would, although in terms of the ending it's taking, its ending is an adjectival ending, right? It's not komi. So it means literally some masculine thing, in this case, a person who is familiar, right? So it's nakomi человек. So again, that's an adjective, and it's only going to take adjectival endings. It doesn't matter how we're using it. It may look as though it's being used as a noun would be, but again, sort of by definition, it is an adjective, and it can only take adjectival endings. Just like papa is a masculine noun that takes feminine endings, and it will always take feminine endings by definition. Okay, next we have some hard feminine nouns. And again, these are all animate, so they're going to be referring to female people or, in some cases, animals. And, well, more on that in a moment. Let's just start the list. Студентка, аспирантка, подруга, сестра, мама, женщина, девушка, девочка, собака. Okay, so that's a feminine noun, and if we're being really specific, I suppose it would refer to a female dog. Although with a lot of animals, there's usually there are separate words for a male of the species versus a female, but sometimes one or the other is used just kind of by default for the given animal. So usually you just see a dog, you aren't really focused on uh, male versus female, you just say sabaka. So it just happens to be the feminine form that's normally used. Anyway, same thing with cat, koshka. So there's an example of a word we will be seeing later, kot. Actually, we saw it in the list just now. Kot is a male cat specifically. Um, again, you can use either of these to refer to a cat. I would say koshka might be slightly more um, likely, but anyway, not that big of a deal. Anyway, a female acquaintance is znakomaya. Znakomaya. Now look how that adjectival ending has changed. If we're referring to a female acquaintance, we need the feminine adjectival ending. Babushka, внучка, дочка, жена, невеста, соседка. There's another example. We had sosed earlier. That's a male neighbor. And here we have the female version, соседка. We'll talk more about those types of words later. Another example we've seen is student versus studentка, aspirant versus aspirantka. And you may notice already a pattern. A lot of times the female version of a given occupation or some type of person is formed by adding ka to the male version, right? Now, obviously, that gives us a feminine noun with feminine endings, right? That ah. But we'll talk more about that later. That pattern doesn't always hold up, by the way, but it is quite common. Okay, what about soft nouns? Let's look at some soft masculine nouns. Парень, парень, a guy. That can also mean a boyfriend. Герой, герой, приятель, приятель, писатель, писатель. And here's a soft masculine that takes feminine endings, right? So the word for uncle, дядя, дядя, looks like a soft feminine, right? But of course it describes a male person. And so this is going to be masculine for agreement purposes, although it takes feminine endings. So more on that later. Okay, finally, one new soft feminine, тетя, тетя, meaning aunt. Okay, what about the genitive endings? Well, let's look at a quick poster, right? Воин Красной Армии, спаси. Okay, warrior or soldier of the Red Army, save, meaning save us. Okay, we saw in another poster the phrase Krasnaya Armia in the nominative, right? The Red Army, Krasnaya Armia. Here we see that those endings have changed, right? They're no longer the nominative endings we've learned so far, right? Instead, we have what indeed are genitive endings. Krasnaya Armia has become Krasny Army, and that change of ending is reflecting a new relationship or a new way this phrase is being used in a sentence. It's being used to express possession. Uh, so we would say in English, soldier of the Red Army, right? So basically, possession, we'll talk more about that later, or just some other relationship. In this case, membership, right? The relationship of a part to a whole or a member to an organization, that type of relationship. Soldier of the Red Army, save us. Okay, so what are these genitive endings? Well, let's look at the table here. And so far, we're just juggling two cases, so it's fairly straightforward. Right, you see you can compare the old nominative endings we learned in chapter 1, right, like новый стол, right? You see there we've got the adjective listed first and then the various types of noun we've encountered so far. Hard masculine, a couple of examples of soft masculines, and then the so-called special soft category, which again, for now, that's not going to matter at all, right? I believe it's in the next, right? It's in the next chapter, I believe, that we're going to see special soft noun endings that are unexpected, and you'll understand why we're having to group those separately. Okay, so let's look over the new endings. Новый стол, to put that into the genitive, we get нового стола, right? So our basic masculine adjectival ending is ova, and our hard noun ending for the genitive is a. Нового стола, of the new table. Now, if we look over at the soft noun endings, we see what we might expect, right? They're simply the soft version of the hard we just mentioned, right? So, in essence, the genitive ending for masculine nouns is but if the noun is soft, it ends in a soft consonant, then the is going to show itself as ya, right? We're going to get a soft vowel instead of the hard vowel. So we get forms like Slovaria, Muzea, Cafeteria. Now keep in mind that adjective novova could match up with any of these. Novova stola, of the new table, Novova Slovaria, of the new dictionary, Novova Muzea, of the new museum, Novova Cafeteria, of the new cafeteria. Okay, feminine, we already glimpsed that in the poster. Adjectives are ending in oi, and hard feminine nouns are taking u. And now if we peek over at the soft versions, we see what we'd expect. Instead of u, which is a hard vowel, we get kind of the closest soft equivalent, e. So we get expressions like новой газеты, of the new newspaper, новой недели, of the new week, новой фамилии, of the new last name. Okay, let's look at neuters. Now, neuters quite often are going to closely resemble masculines. That's true because historically, they belong to a single declension or a single kind of a category of nouns. Um, So more on that later, but for now, you see the endings we have to learn today, thankfully, are exactly like the masculine endings. Novava akna, right? Ova and a. Uh, and then for the soft neuters, we get ya instead of a. Novava moria, of the new sea. Novava bilya, of the new laundry. Novava zadanya, of the new assignment. Okay, remember our spelling rules, our old friends, the spelling rules, of which right, so far we've learned two out of the total of three. We're going to learn the third in this chapter, by the way, when we cover verbs. Do they affect the genitive endings? Yes, they do actually. So let's look this over. Let's start out with feminine nouns. Okay, so let's take a just typical hard example like gazeta. Okay, we just saw that in the genitive, we expect the a to become ui, right? And that would give us gazeti. Okay, so that's an example of a normal uh, feminine noun that's not being affected by the spelling rule. But if that hard feminine noun happened to end in a velar, right, like a g or a ka or a ch, right? So if it ends in any of those seven letters, the four hushings or the three velars, remember that seven-letter rule tells us that we can't write "ui" after those seven letters. Instead, we write "e." Okay, so look how that's affecting this. Kniga becomes knigi. Vodka becomes vodki in the genitive, and dacha becomes dachi, right? We simply can't write an "u" after those letters, and of course that means by extension we can't pronounce an "u" after those letters. Okay, what about the five-letter rule? It can affect adjectives, right? So let's look at a couple of just normal examples. Novi becomes novava, right? Nothing wrong with that. Ruski becomes ruskava, right? So we're trying to add ova for masculine and neuter adjectives. But what about haroshi? Remember, it was being affected earlier by the five-letter rule. Something similar happens here. Haroshi in the genitive becomes haroshava, right? We can't write an unstressed o after the four hushing consonants or the one odd man out, so to speak, that's right? So that reminds us we don't write haroshova, right? We write haroshava. Same thing with feminine endings in the genitive, right? Novaya is just an ordinary adjective. It becomes novy, right? We're adding oy for the genitive. Ruskaya becomes ruski. Now, note there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because the ka is one of those three velars, so those aren't involved in the five-letter rule. See how confusing this can get? But if we see haroshi, again, haroshaya, the feminine form of that, well, the sh is one of the four hushings, right? So that tells us again, we can't write an unstressed o after the four hushings or tsa. So instead of writing oi, we have to write yay, and we get хороший. Okay, so do your best to make sense of these spelling rules. Again, they're really quite a hassle. The good news, or maybe the bad news, is that they'll keep resurfacing over and over. And so I think by the end of hopefully book one and certainly book two, you should be fairly comfortable with these rules, right? You'll just develop a sense of letter combinations that you can never have. And just again, keep in mind that these rules are universally valid. So this isn't something that's specific to the genitive case. All we're doing is as we add new case endings, we're revisiting these spelling rules and seeing how they specifically affect the grammar at hand. Now, what about pronunciation? Well, these adjectival endings ova and oi, uh, they involve an or, right? So remember, if the or isn't stressed, we're not going to say or, we're going to say Okay, so that would mean that the oi would be pronounced oi, oi, right, in an unstressed position. And ova would be pronounced ava, ava. Okay, so that can be a bit tricky. Let's practice a little bit. By the way, you may have noticed the g here again is being pronounced as if it were v, right? Ova. And as we've mentioned already with его, right, that it's precisely this genitive form, его, or here we get a variation on that, ova. That genitive form is the only place in Russian where this happens, where the g is pronounced as a v. By the way, the other example we've seen of that, сегодня, it's the same thing. Сего is an old genitive adjectival form, and the whole phrase means something like of this day. Сегодня, of this day. And that little genitive phrase eventually just became a word, and nowadays it's an adverb. But that variation in the pronunciation is still preserved. Okay, so let's practice a few examples. And again, watch for unstressed or. The trick here really is to remember that if an or isn't stressed, it's never going to be pronounced as or. Okay, so let's say the dictionary of the new student. Словарь новой студентки, right? Новый, not новой, but новый. Okay, a book of Russian poetry. Книга русской поэзии. Okay, so again, focus on the adjective. It's not русской, but русской. Okay, the end of an interesting article. Конец интересной статьи. Конец интересной статьи. So again, интересный, not интересной. Okay, what about ova, right? So again, if it's unstressed, it's not going to be ova. It's going to be ava, right? Or reduces to So the beginning of the Russian novel, Начало русского романа. Начало русского романа, not русского. Sorry, not русского, but русского. Okay, the end of this terrible film. Конец этого ужасного фильма. So этого ужасного and not этого ужасного or something like that. Словарь нового студента, the dictionary of the new student, or again, we could say in English, the new student's dictionary. Now remember, if we have an unstressed adjective like большой, плохой, другой, right, then that ending is always going to be stressed. It's an unstressed adjective. So, of course, if the o is stressed, it won't reduce. And we would say for the beginning of the bad book, начало плохой книги, плохой книги. Or a photograph of the Bolshoi Theater, the big theater, фотография Большого театра, Большого. Okay, let's do exercise 11A and just fill in some genitive endings. Okay, we've got to be careful. And again, this is one aspect of learning Russian, for beginners that just really isn't very much fun. I've mentioned it before. You have a new set of case endings thrown at you. You've got to know them in order to practice them, and you've got to practice them in order to know them. So it's just kind of this chicken and egg thing, and there's no easy way to start just spontaneously using the genitive case. So we'll just do some drills. Now the key, of course, is to first, if you're filling in blanks, filling in genitive endings, you've got to look at what are we talking about? What gender do we need, and what that tells us what endings we need to use, right? So if we look at number one, новая студентка, that's feminine. So we want to make that genitive to say the room of the new student, right? Just like in the example, новый студент, that was masculine. So we want to use that to express possession in Russian. We're going to make it genitive, and we get книга нового студента, right? Those are our masculine endings. But in number one, feminine student, we need feminine endings. So it's going to be комната новой, right? Ой, in this case unstressed. Now what about студентка? It's hard, so we might want to write but the 7-letter spelling rule tells us we can't do that after the ka. We've got to write e instead, and that gives us комната новой студентки, e. Okay, number two, Ruski drug. Okay, that's a masculine noun. So to say the sister of the Russian friend or of our Russian friend, we'd say Sistra Ruskava druga. Sistra Ruskava druga. Again, the ending is not stressed there, so we don't say ova, we say ava. Sistra Ruskava druga. Number three, Ruskaya podruga, a female Russian friend now. So the father of our Russian female friend, our female Russian friend, Отец русской подруги. Подруги. Again, 7-letter spelling rule is telling us we have to write E there instead of U. Okay, number four, starый film, an old film. The beginning of the old film. Начало, okay, we need masculine. Старого фильма. Number five, хороший поэт, a good poet, masculine. The book of the good poet or the good poet's book. Книга хорош. Okay, you might have wanted to write ava, but remember, 5-letter spelling rule tells us we can't write an unstressed o after the 4 hushing consonants or tse, right? Sh is a hushing consonant, so we have to write yeva instead of ava, right? So we get kniga хорошего поэта. Number 6, a good cat, хорошая кошка, feminine. So let's say a photograph of the good cat. Фотография хорошей. Okay, there's the same 5-letter spelling rule issue now with the feminine example, хорошей. And now with the noun, we get another spelling rule, кошка, right? It's hard, but we can't write u because of the 7-letter spelling rule. We write e instead, and we get кошки, кошки. Фотография хорошей кошки. Number 7, Russian writer, русский писатель, the article of the Russian writer. Статья русского ава. Now look at писатель. It's a soft masculine noun. So we can't write писателя, right? That would make it hard all of a sudden. You see, we've got to preserve that final soft L. It's not going to suddenly become hard, right? So instead of writing we need to drop the soft sign and instead write ya, right? Use that soft vowel in place of the hard vowel That gives us статья русского писателя. Number 8, большая собака, a big dog, a photograph of a big dog, фотография большой собаки. Okay, look at большой, that's an unstressed adjective, so there's no problem here having the oi after sh, right? Because the o is stressed, right? So nothing wrong with the stressed o, it's the unstressed o we have to avoid. Okay, and with sabaka, again, 7-letter spelling rule. It's a hard feminine noun, but we can't write u as we might want to. The 7-letter rule tells us we have to write e instead. Number 9, новый сосед, new neighbor. The key of the new neighbor or the new neighbor's key, ключ нового соседа. Нового соседа. Okay, 10, now we have a female neighbor. Новая соседка. Now we have the window of the new neighbor or the new neighbor's window. Окно новый. Right again, ой, but unstressed. Новый соседки. Okay, again, the 7-letter spelling rule is telling us we have to write E here instead of U. So you get some idea here of how often these spelling rules are going to be kind of telling us what to write, right? They're really inescapable. And so I can't emphasize enough how important it is to really get these under your belt. They seem annoying, but they're really important because they're always affecting what we write. Yeah, nice little пословица. Повторение мать учения. Repetition is the mother of learning, and учение there is in the genitive case. Учение becomes учения. Let's look now at a couple of little details, and a lot of what we're learning today will continue to affect our grammar later in the book, right? For example, the mobile vowel. What is a mobile vowel? Well, essentially, for now, the mobile vowel is going to concern us mostly with masculine nouns. A mobile vowel in Russian can be an or, a ye, or a yor. And these occur sometimes in masculine nouns that end in two consonants, and you get a vowel kind of stuck between them, right? Like shinok, kanyets, kavyur, right? The or, the ye, and the yor, respectively, in those three words is a mobile vowel. What happens to a mobile vowel in these masculine nouns is that when we add any ending to it, right? And today that's going to be a genitive ending, but later it could be some other ending. Then the mobile vowel is basically squeezed out. You could think of it that way. It's squeezed out and it just disappears, right? Now remember, for masculine nouns, the reason this happens with them is that they are marked by having no ending, right? So in the nominative, shinok, kanyets, kavyur, they have no ending whatsoever. But in all the other cases, they're going to be adding a new ending, and when that ending is added, the mobile vowel is squeezed out and disappears. And that gives us the following forms: shinka, kansa, kavra. Right? All we've done is added the the masculine ending for the genitive singular, and the mobile vowel has been squeezed out. Here are three more examples. Rybyonak, that becomes rybyonka. Отец becomes отца. Parень, there's a slightly tricky one, right? It's soft. So the ye drops out as the mobile vowel, and then we add ya instead of and we get parnya, parnya. Now, the frustrating thing perhaps is that just because we see an or, ye, or yor in this position in a masculine noun doesn't mean it's necessarily a mobile vowel. And the reasons for that are historical. I could spend maybe half an hour explaining this, but I'll say that for another video, right? At some point, I'll do some videos on the history of Slavic, and there is a reason for this, right? But again, for purposes of learning Russian, we just call this a mobile vowel. And again, unfortunately, just because we see something that looks like it could be a mobile vowel, it doesn't mean that it is one. So essentially, for any new verb you learn, any new noun you learn that's like this, you'd have to consult a dictionary to be certain as to whether or not that or, ye, or yor is a mobile vowel. So let's look at a few examples, and you see the black box again, right? These are kind of exceptions to the sort of rule we just formulated. Look at человек. Okay, it sure looks like a mobile vowel, but it's not. It just simply isn't. So the genitive form of that is going to be человека, right? That yeah is not mobile. It's not squeezed out. It stays there. Игрок, same thing here. Игрока, игрока. Now there we can kind of guess that's not going to act as a mobile vowel because that would give us a really hard to pronounce consonant cluster. Igrka, igrka or something. Igrka, igrka. Okay, that's really hard to pronounce. So that helps us explain in this case why that's not a mobile vowel. But again, you would have to, especially at this stage in your Russian career, you'd have to consult a dictionary to know. Okay, what about kot? Well, that would be pronounceable, kta, kta, but again, it's simply not a mobile vowel, so it doesn't disappear, and we get kata in the genitive, of the cat. Vapros gives vaprosa in the genitive. Ответ gives ответа, right? Vapros is a question, ответ is an answer. Neither noun has a mobile vowel. And finally, вечер, meaning evening, that gives us вечера, no mobile vowel. Okay, let's discuss quickly how the genitive case is used. This is a fairly straightforward one. We said that kind of generally you can think of the genitive case endings as expressing possession or some other close relationship between two nouns, right? So often you'll notice that it's not literally possession, right? But some other kind of relationship like that. And in almost any case, the relationship can be captured by the English preposition of, right? So we'll see throughout this course, today's uses of the genitive, and later we'll add additional uses of the genitive. And almost all of them, again, can be expressed using English of. So essentially, if you see a Russian noun with a genitive ending, if you translate it into English using of, it will make perfectly good sense in English, right? And you'll see what's going on there. So let's look at a few examples that are slightly different, but again, you'll see in every case we can translate them using of. Okay, the words in bold here are in the genitive in Russian. Комната нового студента. Okay, so нового студента, that's genitive. What's translated using of, and we get the room of the student, the room of the new student, or the student's room. Right now, often to express possession in English, we can switch to an apostrophe S. And by the way, that's one of the few remaining case endings in English, right? That's a genitive case ending in English. Of course, we don't think of it that way, but that's what it is. Back in historically, English had a full set of case endings, but it was lost gradually, and today we have almost no case endings. Okay, so what about the next example? Drug Ivana. Okay, a friend of Ivan or Ivan's friend. Окно кухни, the window of the kitchen, right? Or the kitchen window, right? So there we would translate that maybe a little bit differently. The kitchen window, or literally the window of the kitchen. Кухни is in the genitive there. Карта России, a map of Russia, right? Россия has been put into the genitive here. России, a map of Russia. Конец фильма, the end of the movie. Поэзия Пушкина, the poetry of Pushkin. Now, keep in mind, sometimes in Russian you can get chains of genitive or nouns, right? For example, Резиденция президента России, the residence of the president of Russia, right? So both of those final two words are in the genitive. We just translate them using of, and it makes perfect sense. The residence of the president of Russia. Finally, here's maybe a slightly silly example I just made up, right? To get a string of three genitives. Начало конца блокады Leningrada, the beginning of the end of the siege of Leningrad. Right? Or look at this poster. Изучайте великий путь партии Ленина-Сталина. Study the great path of the party, right? Партия has become партии, genitive. And now we get this kind of funny, perhaps hyphenated Lenin-Stalin, meaning Lenin and Stalin, and here both appearing in the genitive. So the study the great path of the party of Lenin and Stalin. Next, anytime we learn a new case, we'll learn some common prepositions that take that case by definition. So we'll learn that in Russian, any given preposition simply takes a certain case. That's part of just how it's used in sentences. And there are quite a few that take the genitive case, right? So let's start with one we've seen already, ooh, right? Remember back in chapter 1, we were using this with pronouns to say things like у меня, у тебя, meaning literally at me, at you. We were using that to express possession. And we mentioned at the time that those forms we were using, у меня, у тебя, right? Меня, тебя, него, нее, and so forth. Those are the genitive forms of pronouns, right? So now that we've learned the genitive endings for nouns, we can now use this u expression with nouns and say things like u mami, literally at mom. Now that can express possession, as we know already, and also it can express being at someone's place, right? So umami can mean at mom's place, or you can also express things like visiting mom, right? For example, я был у мамы would mean literally I was at mom's place, or I was at mom's, or maybe I was visiting mom. For example, у мамы есть новая машина. At mom is a new car, right? Expressing possession. Mom has a new car. Or я была у мамы вчера. I was at mom yesterday. I was visiting mom yesterday. Okay, here's a new one. Без means without. And again, we're going to say без takes the genitive by definition. It's followed by some noun in the genitive. Комната у меня без окна. My room is without a window, right? I have a room without a window. Комната у меня без окна. От means from. От takes the genitive. У меня письмо от друга. From a friend. Для also takes the genitive, meaning for. Это подарок для отца. Okay, это, we're pointing to it. This is a present for father, for my father. Против means against. It's followed by the genitive as well. Ты против коммунизма? Ты против коммунизма? Are you against communism? And finally, this isn't really a preposition, but rather a little phrase. Think of it maybe as kind of phrasal preposition, right? Literally in the time, во время. And just like in English, we say in the time of, right? Like love in the time of cholera, right? Or a feast in time of plague, right? Same thing in Russian. Во время plus the genitive. Во время блокады Leningrada не было еды. Во время блокады Leningrada. In the time of the blockade of Leningrad. Okay, so there's another example where we have two genitive nouns in a row. If we look at a poster for an example of a prepositional phrase with the genitive, Болтун находка для врага. A babbler is a find for the enemy. Для врага. Враг means enemy. Here we've put it into the genitive, врага, because it's following this preposition that requires the genitive. Okay, so we've learned the genitive endings for nouns and adjectives. Now, again, this is something we'll have to do every time we learn a new case. We've got to clean up the remaining types of words we know, right? And that means a couple of things. First, the question words, что and кто, right? Which ask what and who, right? Those are pronouns and they have their own set of case endings, right? So we've got to learn those. And then secondly, we've got to worry about all those so-called special modifiers, right? Those words we learned a few days ago that have, they basically work as adjectives. They can also stand alone as pronouns. And in any case, they have endings that are somewhat different from those of ordinary adjectives. So we'll have to look at those and learn how they're used in the genitive. So if we refer to these quick tables here, right, we see что becomes чего, and кто becomes кого. And you can see that those endings there, that these forms aren't just completely outlandish, right? They look like genitive forms, right? Well, we see the ova and ева essentially, but the stress is a bit weird, right? Чего, кого. Okay, what about этот? Well, that works just like a hard adjective, so it's not too difficult. Этого, этой, этого. Those are your genitive endings. Мой or твой. Remember those two forms, мой and твой, work exactly the same. Моего, моей, моего. And remember, finally, наш and ваш both work exactly the same. So we get нашего, нашей, нашего. Right there, you see that because of the 5-letter spelling rule, we can't have an or in this ending. So again, most of these forms tend to make sense. Look back at мой and твой. You'll see that, remember, и краткое is considered a soft consonant, so we need a soft version of the ending here, right? Моего, моей, моего. So again, generally these special modifiers will work more or less, well, in a way that isn't too just crazy, but we do have to pay special attention because they're always going to be a little bit tricky. Okay, what about pronouns? Well, the good news here is that we've already seen these pronouns, at least following u, right? We saw those back in chapter 1. So let's look over the genitive forms of pronouns. Я becomes меня. But if we use that after a preposition, that's how we'll be using this for the most part right now. then that form may change a bit. So let's look this over. Я, меня, or for example, after the preposition у меня, ты becomes тебя, or after the preposition у тебя. Okay, no change so far, but we get to the black box and we see that pronoun forms that begin with a ye or an e, right, that begin with a vowel, they add an n when they're used following a preposition. And that explains the forms we already learned back in chapter 1, right? The genitive of on is его, but when used after a preposition, that becomes у него, right? The genitive of она is ее, but after a preposition, we get у нее. We add an n in front of it. Neuter, again, looks like the masculine, оно, его, у него. Okay, over in the plural, мы becomes нас, у нас. Вы becomes вас. And after the preposition, у вас. So no change for those two, but они becomes их. And after the preposition, we have to add an n, and we get у них, у них. Why is an n added there? That goes back a long, long way into the history of Proto-Indo-European languages. And again, that's the thing I'd love to talk about for 30 minutes, but I'll save it for later. Okay, so anyway, there is a reason. I just mentioned that to say that there is a reason for this. Some things in language look like they're completely random, right? Where is this n coming from? Anyway, more on that some other time. Let's revisit this one tricky example. We've mentioned this over and over back in chapter 1, and here's a more complete look at it. Let's imagine we're going to take u, which requires a genitive case form, and we want to add on to it to say at him, right? Well, again, we can't say u его, we have to say у него, right? Because that's the genitive form of this pronoun on that's used after prepositions. So we change it a bit, we say у него есть новая машина. Okay, now here's an example that confuses people. What if we wanted to say at his friend, right? We want to say not that he has something, but his friend has something. Okay, remember, his friend is его друг. That его is the possessive form, right? We said that the Russian for his is его, and that form used in that meaning, his, never, ever, ever changes in any way whatsoever in Russian. Right? Now remember, the same goes for ее and ich, right? It's those third person forms, the possessive forms that never ever change. So his, hers, theirs, right? Его, ее, ich, they never change. Okay, so here's an example of what we mean. If we say his friend has, or literally at his friend, we don't write у него друга. That would mean he has a friend. Right, we want to say at his friend. The his part never changes. So we write у его друга. Now, why is that? Because его, again, another way to think about it maybe is that его is not the object of the preposition. Right? Drug is the object of the preposition. Right? Его is just this possessive form that's modifying drug, or druga in this case. Right, but again, maybe the simplest way to think of it is here that's used meaning his, and so it's never going to change in any way, and in particular here, not by adding an n. Okay, let's do an exercise and fill in some examples of more genitive endings following prepositions. Okay, so let's answer the question, без чего ты не можешь жить, right? Without what are you not able to live? We have a verb here. We're going to learn this verb later in the chapter. So for now, let's just look at the examples. Без чего, without what can you not live? Now look at the что, right? Without what, after без, we need a genitive form. So we've got to say not что, but чего. Без чего ты не можешь жить. Okay, let's say things like я не могу жить без хорошей машины. I can't live without a good car. Okay, again, following BS, we've got to have genitive. So we need to think what gender word are we dealing with here? What endings do we need? And watch out for spelling rules. Okay, I can't live without Russian literature. Я не могу жить без русской литературы. Ой, right? Hard feminine. Okay, русский словарь, Russian dictionary. I can't live without a Russian dictionary. Я не могу жить без русского словаря. Now note the soft ending, словаря, right? That's a soft masculine. So we have to keep it soft. We have to add a ya instead of an a. Number 3, мой новый телефон, my new telephone. Я не могу жить без моего нового телефона. So его, ова, a. Без моего нового телефона. Number 4, моя любимая книга, my favorite book. Я не могу жить без моей любимой книги. Okay, feminine endings, right? Yay, oi, and now kniga is a hard feminine, but we can't add to it, right? Instead, 7-letter rule tells us we have to write kniги. Number 5, наше большое окно. Я не могу жить без нашего большого окна. There's a neuter. Remember, the neuter endings look just like masculines. Okay, number 6. Ich computer. Okay, their computer. Now again, note that this ich here is being used as a possessive, their or theirs, right? It's never going to change. So we say, я не могу жить без их компьютера. I can't live without their computer. Now, remember, if we wanted to say I can't live without them, that's just the pronoun, right? So that would be без них. Не могу жить без них. But here we say without their computer, я не могу жить без их компьютера. Number 7, a photograph of a cat. Фотография кошки. Okay, let's say I can't live without a photograph of a cat or my cat. Я не могу жить без фотографии кошки. Okay, фотография is a special soft feminine. The ya here changes to e, right? Без фотографии. Без фотографии. Now note that ending e, remember the old rule that no Russian vowel is silent, right? So if we have two vowels there in the ending, e, then that should be two distinct syllables if we're speaking clearly. Без фотографии. Без фотографии кошки. Number 8, хороший друг. I can't live without a good friend. Я не могу жить без хорошего друга. Okay, there's the 5-letter rule, right? Can't have an unstressed o after sh. We write yeah instead. Без хорошего друга. Number 9, his old dog. I can't live without his old dog. Now again, его here means his, so it's not going to change. Я не могу жить без его старой собаки. Okay, after the ka, we get an e, right? Because of the 7-letter spelling rule. Okay, let's do one more set, just practicing a different preposition that takes the genitive для. Для кого это подарок? For whom is this present? Okay, there's the, again, кто, we need it here in the genitive because we're using it after для. So we've got to use the genitive form of the word. Кто becomes кого. Для кого это подарок? Это подарок для нашего старого друга. Okay, let's do some more examples. This is the present for this new student. Это подарок для этого нового студента. Right, hard masculines. Okay, this is the present for our professor. Это подарок для нашего профессора. Okay, note the form нашего, note the spelling. You could think of that as a kind of 5-letter spelling rule issue, нашего. Number 13, его отец, his father. Okay, again, his, that's never going to change in Russian. So we say это подарок для его отца. Now remember, if it were present for him, that would be это подарок для него. But this isn't him, this is his father. So that его is never going to change. It's a present for your mother. Это подарок для вашей мамы. Для вашей мамы. Number 15, a present for her grandmother. Again, the her part is not going to change. Это подарок для нашей бабушки. Again, if it were a present for her, then it would be для нее. But that's not what we have here. Okay, 16, again, их, their, that's not going to change. Это подарок для их сына, for their son. Это подарок для, for our old friend, для нашего старого друга, masculine. Number 18, this is a present for our favorite writer. Okay, remember, писатель is soft. See the soft sign there. So we've got to continue to mark it as soft. Это подарок для любимого писателя. Number 19, твоя подруга, your female friend. Это подарок для твоей подруги. 7-letter rule telling us we can't write we have to write e. Okay, I got a bit bored there. I've been playing with it actually off screen. I'm so bored with this grammar. Okay, here's a poslovica to lighten the mood. This is a fairly common one. You're very likely to hear this at some point in your during your time in Russia. Pivo без водки, деньги на ветер. Okay, there's an example. See how carefully chosen this poslovica is, right? It's got our grammar we've just done. Без. Beer without vodka is money to the wind, literally. That basically means that if you're going to party, you should just go all out, right? If you just sip some beer, then you're just wasting your money. You need to chase it with vodka, right? You need to really party. Otherwise, it's just like throwing your money to the wind. Okay, now let's think about the grammar here. Piva, that's your subject. Beer, that's in the nominative, but без takes the genitive, so we get vodki, right? Vodka becomes vodki. Here's a little conversational exercise you could try with a partner. Just tell what you can't live without, right? So take some of these items. I gave you a few examples. Maybe you know some other things you can't live without. Okay, and use them after без. You're going to have to put the items into the genitive, right? So let's take something that I can't live without. That would definitely be Russian literature. Ты можешь жить без русской литературы? Could you live without Russian literature? Нет, я не могу жить без русской литературы. Or you might answer, yeah, I could live without that. Да, я могу жить без русской литературы. Okay, and there the question, of course, the philosophical question is that, of course, you could exist, on a purely biological level without Russian literature, but what kind of life would that be, right? That's just kind of mere existence. It's not life in its fullness, right? I mean, what would life be without Russian literature? I shudder at the very thought of it, frankly. And Chekhov up there also would say that I think living without Russian literature is a bad idea. Yeah, who else do I have out there? Pushkin. See him in the corner? Pushkin, right? Who would want to live without Pushkin? I wouldn't. Okay, anyway, so you can do that with a partner somewhere. Okay, let's look at adjectives that can stand alone as nouns. We mentioned this already. Our example so far is znakomy. Okay, the main point to be made here is znakomy is an adjective. It doesn't matter how we use it. It's an adjective, and that means it's going to take adjectival endings, right? That's the only type of ending this word can take by definition. So we may use it sort of as a noun, right? Letting it stand all by itself the way a noun might, but it's never going to take noun endings. Why? Because it's not a noun. Okay, so we'll see other examples of this later. It's not actually that unusual in Russian. Now remember, znakomy means, literally means known or familiar, right? So as znakomy is a male acquaintance, right? Some male person who's known. A female would be znakomaya, right? So znakomaya is a female acquaintance. Okay, what if we use those in the genitive? Well, they would take adjectival genitive endings, right? For example, это машина моего нового знакомого. This is the car of my new acquaintance, right? This is my new acquaintance's car. Or female version, это машина моей новой знакомой. Okay, let's do some more examples with whose whatever is this, and now let's put the phrase into the genitive to express possession. Okay, machina. Chata machina. Chata machina. Whose car is this? Okay, let's take моя мама. We want to say this is the car of my mom. Это машина моей мамы. Моей мамы. By the way, we skipped the example. Чей это телевизор? Это телевизор моего отца. Okay, number two. Чья это фотография? Whose photograph? Okay, let's say this is a photograph of my brother. By the way, kind of like in English, this could mean that he owns it or that it's a photograph of your brother, right? That he's in the photograph, right? So we would need more context to know really which one it is here. Это фотография моего брата. Masculine endings, моего брата. Number three, whose window is this? Чье это окно? Okay, let's say this is the window of his sister. This is his sister's window. Это окно его сестры. Okay, now remember that его part is the his is never ever going to change, right? So in here it's simply modifying sister. Sister is the what we need to put into the genitive. Это окно его сестры. Number four, whose grandmother is that? Чья это бабушка? Okay, let's say that's the grandmother of our Russian friend's grandma. Это бабушка нашего русского друга. By the way, that's one of these words you hear sometimes in English, and usually they say babushka or something, babushka, with a bad accent. But note that the stress in the Russian is babushka, babushka. It's not babushka. Okay, so that's a fairly common mistake to make. Babushka means grandmother. Okay, grandfather is dedushka, right? Number five, whose grandfather is that? Чей это дедушка? Okay, why is that surprising perhaps? Because dedushka, now keep in mind it refers to a guy, right? To a male person, grandpa. But we see it's one of these peculiar nouns that take feminine endings, right? Despite being masculine. So we've got to say che, right? Anything we use to describe this masculine noun is going to be masculine because it is masculine. The only thing feminine about it is its ending. Okay, so that's going to take some getting used to. Anyway, che это дедушка. Whose grandfather is that? Let's say it's the grandfather of our Russian friend, our female friend. Это дедушка нашей русской подруги. Okay, number six, whose brother is that? Чей это брат? Let's say of our male acquaintance. Okay, now знакомый is an adjective. We've got to put a genitive adjectival ending on that. Это брат нашего знакомого. Okay, same thing with наша знакомая, just now the feminine version of that, right? Our female acquaintance. Чья это сестра? Whose sister is that? This is the sister of our female acquaintance. Это сестра нашей знакомой. Our final topic today is in-stressed masculine nouns. Okay, so we're talking about stress. That's always going to be a bit of a can of worms, right? We know already that placement of stress is a difficult thing about Russian pronunciation, not only in terms of just pronouncing it properly in the first place, but also knowing where it falls. And we're going to see today an early example of how when we start manipulating the endings of a word, right, we start changing the form of a word, then in certain cases, the stress will start jumping around in ways that aren't always predictable. So that just adds another level of difficulty to the language. Now, again, the unfortunate thing is that we really can't ignore this because it's so conspicuous that if you're at all serious about learning Russian, you can't just sort of hope it'll go away or think that you can kind of just muddle your way through and kind of pronounce each syllable more or less equally and hoping no one will notice, right? That will always be incorrect, right? So I always tell students it's better as a learner to misplace the stress sometimes than not to place it anywhere, right? Because the most important thing for beginners is just picking up on the phonetic principle. And then as you continue with the language, you'll get more and more comfortable knowing where to put the which syllable receives the stress, and also as the word starts changing, how that stress might jump around. And we're going to talk about that actually quite a bit when we cover verbs here in a couple of days. Uh, for now, let's look at an important pattern with certain masculine nouns. If we say that a masculine noun has end stress, it means that whenever we add an ending to that noun, the stress will always be on the ending. Now let's think about masculine nouns we know are marked by having no ending in the nominative, right? So back in chapter one, all the masculine nouns we were using had no ending, and that's how we could tell that they were masculine nouns, right? Now today we've seen that in the genitive we start adding endings. We start adding an a or a ya to the masculine noun. Okay, so if the noun happens to be an in-stressed noun, it means that that ending, that genitive ending, or later any other case ending we add to it, the stress is going to jump onto the ending. It's going to be in-stressed everywhere an ending appears. Um, okay, let's look over a few examples. First, let's start with just some non, just some more or less ordinary nouns, right? For most nouns so far, the stress will stay where it is in the nominative, right? So let's take feminines, for example. Well, they already have an ending in the nominative. So uh, when we substitute a genitive ending for that nominative ending, there's no shift in the stress. So mama becomes mami, sestra becomes sestry, девушка becomes девушки. Let's take a neuter example. Окно becomes окна, right? There's no shift in the stress. We're just simply changing the endings. Now, one other example with the mobile vowel drops out, but the stress stays on the same syllable. You see what's happening there? So we have ot followed by a second syllable, yet or tsa, right? So the mobile vowel has dropped out. We've added the vowel of the new ending, but the stress doesn't actually move. Although this would be considered an in-stressed masculine noun. It's just one with a mobile vowel, which kind of helps explain what's going on here in terms of the stress. Now, other nouns are not predictable, right? So let's look over a few. Kot, stol, мяч, tsar, vrag, ключ. Quite a few of these are monosyllabic, right? So they're only one syllable long in the nominative. Quite a few nouns like that are one syllable, masculines. When we add an ending, uh, they show that they're in stressed, right? So the stress jumps to the ending, and we get kot becoming kata, stol becomes stala in the genitive, мяч becomes мяча in the genitive, tsar becomes tsarya. There's a soft example, right? Uh, so of the tsar would be tsarya. Vrag becomes vraga. Ключ becomes ключа. Now, some of these are more than one syllable. Now, in order for a masculine noun of more than one syllable to potentially be an in-stress noun, then in the nominative, the stress has to be on the final syllable, right? So, for example, if this word were slover, then we would have no reason to think it could possibly be an in-stress noun, but it's actually slavar, right? Stress on the final syllable. And that helps us guess that there's at least a chance that this is an in-stress noun. And indeed it is. Slovaria. Slovaria means of the dictionary. Rugzak becomes rugzaka. Жених, a groom, a fiancé, a male fiancé becomes ženicha. Those are all unstressed nouns. And finally, here's one that's 3 syllables. Again, with the stress on the third and final syllable, it's an unstressed noun. It becomes grandasha, grandasha. Okay, so we've seen a few types of masculine noun that can be unstressed, but again, sort of like we saw earlier with the mobile vowel, just because we see something that looks like it could follow a certain pattern doesn't always mean that we can be sure that it will. And unfortunately, this in-stress pattern for masculine nouns is something we can't know for sure. So if we wanted to be certain, we'd have to look the word up in a dictionary or including the dictionary in the back of the book. And you'll see there that most dictionary entries will give you first the uh, nominative singular, of course, of the noun, followed by the genitive form or at least the genitive ending. So if we look up a word and see, for example, like quot, kata, or if we see simply quot, comma, stressed right, an with a stress mark in a normal dictionary, or in my book with an underline, right, an underlined that's telling us that the genitive ending of quot is stressed kata, and that's enough to tell us that that is indeed an in-stressed masculine noun. Now, again, let's look at a few more examples, and we see that generally masculine nouns won't follow this pattern, especially if they're more than one syllable and the nominative singular stress is not on the final syllable, right? Like after, that's not going to be an in-stress noun. That's just going to be after in the genitive. Писатель will become писателья. Родственник becomes родственника. Right, so an early example today of something weird going on with stress. And the temptation usually is to think that stress is going to be jumping around like this in some maniacal way with every word we encounter. But it's good to keep in mind that patterns like this generally are the exception to the rule. If we had to guess, we could safely guess that with nouns, for example, the stress is going to stay on the same syllable everywhere. That would be the most statistically probable pattern. So we'll focus on these weird patterns and try to keep them kind of restricted and not think that they're going to be applying to every last noun we see. Think of them as kind of a special case. By the way, before we end today's lesson, I pointed earlier to my little Pushkin portrait that I believe I bought in his apartment in Petersburg. If you don't know who Pushkin is yet, he's definitely the #1 Russian poet, the most famous, most beloved Russian poet, generally speaking, and generally kind of the founder of modern Russian literature. Although there were some pretty great poets that came before him, but he's really the first major modern figure in Russian literature. And of course, he started a real flowering of Russian literature that we all know, right? The golden age of Russian literature, starting with Pushkin and other poets like Lermontov, and then later, the age of the great novel, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and you go on and on. And then the silver age of Russian literature, symbolism, and all these people. So anyway, Pushkin was kind of the initial impetus to this miraculous flowering of literature in Russia. Um, so, by the way, if you're curious about Pushkin, we're going to read a lot of him in books 3 and 4 when our focus shifts from the Soviet period back to the imperial period. But if you'd like to read some Pushkin, you may have noticed this separate video series I'm doing called Reading Russian, where we just do close readings of Russian texts, especially poetry. And I've already done several Pushkin poems, and I'm sure I'll do many more. I'll be adding them quite regularly, I hope, and that should give you a taste of Pushkin. Okay. Anyway, until next time, до свидания, товарищи.